Welcome to the Y Central Health and Safety Training. This is part of the induction for all new Y Central staff. Y Central Health and Safety Policy is about maintaining a safe and healthy work environment for all staff, clients, volunteers and visitors to all sites so that everyone goes home safe each day. We are governed by the Health and Safety at Work Act, or HSWA 2015, which is the legislation for New Zealand for health and safety. This legislation is administered and enforced by WorkSafe, and in it, everyone in a workplace has responsibilities for health and safety. The main duty of care sits with what is known as the PCBU, or the person conducting a business or undertaking. In our case, this is the Y Central as an organisation is the PCBU. However, although the responsibility or the main duty of care sits with the PCBU, you can be personally charged with reckless conduct in respect of a health and safety duty or failure to comply with a health and safety duty. So if you didn't follow policy and procedure, you failed to comply with a health and safety duty, you can be personally charged. So let's have a look at some of the offences. So in the circle there is those charges for individuals who are not a PCBU or officer of a PCBU. So just a regular worker at a workplace. So under section 47, which is reckless conduct in respect of duty that exposes an individual to a risk of serious injury, illness or death, you can have up to 5 years in prison, a $300,000 fine or both. Section 48, which is failure to comply with a duty that exposes an individual to a risk of serious injury, illness or death, is a $150,000 fine. And Section 49, which is failure to comply with a duty, is a $50,000 fine. So you can see there is a lot at risk for individuals under this legislation as well, which is why it's important that we all have responsibility for health and safety. So board members and the CEO of Y Central are considered officers of the PCBU. And officers have to ensure that the PCBU, in our case the YMCA or Y Central, is meeting health and safety obligations. So they have set up and monitor health and safety systems and processes. The rest of us are workers who carry out work for the YMCA. That's whether we're paid staff or unpaid volunteers. So the Health and Safety at Work Act requires YMCA to provide opportunities for worker participation in improving work health and safety on an ongoing basis. So we do this in a number of ways. We have a Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety representatives, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Because involvement leads to greater ownership of and commitment to health and safety. So by having worker participation, we're making sure that we have safer environments, because it's what we do that makes a difference. So the YMCA is required to ensure that the workplace is safe so far as reasonably practicable. So what that means is that we need to balance the potential risk with the time and cost. So as an example, you'd spend less time managing the risk of paper cuts than the risk of death from fall from height. So we need to make sure that the YMCA is safe so far as time and cost will allow us. So to reduce risk, we do that in a number of ways. Firstly, we can reduce how serious the harm would be if a risk does occur, and or reduce the chances of the risk occurring. So in the first instance, we eliminate the risk. It's no longer there, but if we can't do that, we need to minimize the impact of it. We also have shared responsibilities with other PCBUs. So for example, we may have programs that run on site with schools, for example, an out-of-school care program, or a sport and rec person goes and runs a play trailer on site at school. We might go to other places on excursions. We might use transport operators, for example. We might use buses to take us to an excursion. We might have activity tutors come into our programs. And all of those we have shared responsibilities with. So it's important that the people who are planning and organising the programs are collaborating and consulting with those PCBUs about how to manage risks. So we need to know what their systems and processes are that we must comply with. For example, if we're on a school, we have to comply with school rules. And it's important that all staff on site know what those are and comply with them. We also need to look at their systems and processes effectively to manage risk. So if we're looking at going, say, for rock climbing, but we felt, or the person who was organising the trip felt that the systems and processes didn't effectively manage risk, we might make the decision to not use that provider and to go somewhere else. Or we might need to put something else in place ourselves to make sure that it's safe. And that's where we have YMCA health, safety, systems and processes. So these include child safety and protection, such as safeguarding, and you'll have done a separate safeguarding training as part of your induction. Emergency preparedness, activity management plans, or AMPs, hazard and risk identification and management, incident and accident reporting, health and safety forms on the intranet, and also monitoring of our health and safety system processes, and this is done by maintaining records, submission of forms for auditing, as well as having auditing. The first thing we want to look at is the worker participation in improving health and safety. And the first way this is done is through having the Health and Safety Committee. And the role of the Health and Safety Committee enables the YMCA, as well as its worker representatives, to meet regularly and work cooperatively in order to improve health and safety across the work environment. So the Health and Safety Committee is run by the Quality Compliance and Safeguarding Advisor, and then there's health and safety reps from each area of the organisation. They meet on a quarter basis, and on those meetings they review incidents that have happened over that quarter, just look at trends, where we might need to change things, where hazards have arisen, where we might need to do further training, review and change policies, write new policies, and then it's disseminated back through the organisation. So the Health and Safety Committee improve work health and safety by making it easy for the Y and workers to cooperate on ways to ensure workers' health and safety at work, helping to develop standards, rules and policies or procedures for work health and safety, and making recommendations on workplace health and safety, and ensuring that actions are followed through. So health and safety representatives not only take concerns from workers in the environment to the Health and Safety Committee, they also disseminate information from the committee back down to the workplace. As well as the Health and Safety Committee, other worker participation includes health and safety training. So it's really important that you are doing training. So you're doing this training today as part of your induction. There's also regular training done on a yearly basis. So once a year, we have a health and safety HUI training, and that includes health and safety. There's also opportunities that arise in your own business units to do health and safety training, whether formally or informally. And members of the Health and Safety Committee also do external training every year. We also have team meetings where health and safety is discussed. So all team meetings at all levels of the organisation have health and safety on the agenda. And it's also important that staff are taking ownership and participating fully. So you're contributing your knowledge and ideas and acting in child safety and protection, emergency preparedness, risk assessment and management, hazard identification and management, and incident debriefing. So this is a further guide to YMCA health and safety systems and processes. So policies and procedures are really the backbone of health and safety. So you need to get familiar with these ASAP. So all our current up-to-date policies and procedures are on the intranet. So that's the best place for you to go to have a look at policies and procedures. We'll talk about the intranet a little bit further in this training, but also have a chat with your manager and get familiar with the intranet and where all the policies and procedures are, and ask them about the key policies and procedures for your site. All business units have different checklists and forms that are important to use in their business unit, so know what those are, where to find them, and how to use them. Again, health and safety training, important that it's done when we're inducted, not just this training, but also you should do an induction on site so you know what the evacuation siren sounds like, where the evacuation meeting point is, all those sorts of things, where the first aid kit is. And as I said previously, we also do yearly health and safety training. And as part of our MSD contract, we do have to do annual mandatory training. And again, health and safety should be on the agenda for every team meeting. So if you're going into a team meeting and health and safety is not on the agenda, make sure you raise it. And that can include things like preparing and reviewing AMPs, going over policies and procedures, reviewing incidents, and so on. The one thing that we need to have is emergency preparedness. Emergencies happen and we need to make sure that we're ready. So at each site, we have emergency management plans. You might hear them referred to as EMPs. And those emergency management plans cover what would we do in situations like bomb threats, serious injury or death, tsunami, flooding, gas leak, hazardous spills, suspicious mail, trespass on grounds, violent intruder, and lockdown. So it outlines what the plan for your site is going to be. And it might look different for each site. So you need to know your specific site emergency management plan. So it should be in a space that's really easy for you to access. So ask your manager where it is and make sure you're familiar with it. It's something that you should just be able to pick up and go with when there's an emergency. And fire as well, and lockdown. We also do evacuation and fire drills so that we are prepared when we do have to evacuate our site or when there is a fire. So each building should have a fire evacuation plan which outlines the roles and responsibilities of staff and what the processes are. And these should be in a really visible space. So usually they're on the wall by a door, so they're really visible for everyone to see and outlines where your emergency evacuation point is and so on. And fire evacuations, the drills, need to be completed once every 6 months at a minimum. For some business units, this may be completed more often. For example, out of school care, it's stipulated that they need to do a practice once a term and once a week of school holidays. Ministry of Education have their own guidelines and so on. But at a minimum, the evacuation to be practiced once every 6 months. And once the evacuation is done, then an evacuation form must be completed and uploaded to the internet. And that's for all drills, all evacuations, even if they were a false alarm. And that's so that we can have a record of it. We can know that they've been done, but also we can use them to debrief and practice and get better at doing drills. While we're talking about emergency preparedness, we also talk about emergency response plans. And this is for earthquake, fire, tsunami, and flood. We've already talked about fire and that each site should have a fire evacuation plan visible on site. But we also have emergency response plans for earthquakes, tsunamis, and floods. And the general advice is know what the plans are for your specific site. So each site is different. So your plans should be visible and you should be told about them in your inductions, referred to at trainings and meetings. And know where your civil defence site is. Are you on site? Do you have a civil defence site where you are located? Do you have to go a K down the road? Also, keep a fully stocked personal getaway kit at work. That's a recommendation. And sites should have emergency survival food and water on site. In an earthquake, during the earthquake, keep calm, which is easier said than done, but it's important that we try to keep calm, particularly if we're working on programs where there might be children, young people, other vulnerable people who might feed off us getting upset. Stay indoors where practical. Keep away from windows and heavy furniture. Take cover. Get under a strong table or other sturdy structure. So remember the rules: drop, cover, hold. Then following an earthquake, if the building is damaged, turn off water, electricity at mains. So you might be the manager of the building and you can do that, or you might be in a program that's using another building and the building manager will do that. Do not turn off natural gas unless you smell a leak or hear a blowing or hissing sound or are advised to do so by the authorities. And if you're in a damaged building, try to get outside and find a safe, open place. You could use your assembly area if that's safe to do so. Conserve your water, treat injuries, and when help is needed, go to your nearest civil defence post. Again, your site might be a civil defence post, or you might need to go to your nearest civil defence post. Now, if you're a program who are working with children and young people, you might need to text parents when you are moving off-site, but you always need to let your manager know if you move location. And also advise your manager of any damage sustained in the earthquake. We've already talked about fire emergency plans, but in general with a fire, if you see a fire, raise the alarm. When you hear the alarm, evacuate people from the area. So follow your emergency evacuation process for your site. Call emergency services. Remember, dial 111. Call your manager if they're not there. And then in a tsunami and flood. So be prepared to get to high ground. Some sites are not in a tsunami zone, so if an earthquake is long or strong and there's a risk of tsunami, you might not need to evacuate. But for other people, you might need to get to high ground. If you have children on site, you will need to text parents and caregivers if you're having to move. Turn off electricity supplies, but again, do not turn off natural gas unless you smell a leak or hear a blowing or hissing sound, or are advised to do so by the authorities. If it's a flood, never go into floodwaters alone, and do not go sightseeing. You might want to go and see an area that's flooded, but do not do that. Never drink floodwater. And move valuables, clothing, food, and medicines above likely reach of floodwater only if it is safe to do so. Obviously, in the event of something like this, people are the priority. So only do that if it is safe to do so. We've talked about evacuation and fire drills. And in evacuation and fire drill, different staff have different responsibilities. So it's really important to make sure that you know what is expected of you. We need to make sure that there are clear and accessible fire escapes. So this is done before a fire happens. When you're doing a check of your building in the day, if you see something in obstructing a fire exit, make sure you move it, or if you can't move it yourself, make sure you get somebody else to. When we're having a fire drill, the reason we have a fire drill is to identify things that might be making our fire escapes hard to get out of. When it is a fire evacuation or fire drill, you need to take with you an attendance list if required. So if you're running a program where there's children or young people, or you're responsible for people, you need to take an attendance list so you know that you've got everybody. Have a cell phone with you, and if needed, it could be loaded with emergency contact details. So again, if you are running a program where you're responsible for people, you'd have emergency contact details loaded in it. Take a portable first aid kit, maybe a grab bag if you need it. It's important that we check all parts of the buildings. So all the toilets, all the offices, all the parts of the buildings. So people will be just assigned different areas of the building to evacuate. So make sure you know what part of the area of the building you are checking, and then report to the building warden that your part of the area is clear. Someone will be delegated to call 111, and if there are people with disabilities on site, someone will be delegated to help those people. And keep the participants calm and focused. So evacuate quickly, but don't panic. If you're running a program where you are responsible for the people, do a head check and take the role to ensure all are accounted for. So for example, if you were in early childhood or your education class, out of school program, you've got the children in your care. If you are a gym and people have come in to do the gym, they're responsible for themselves. And if you've cleared the building and you know that no one's in there, you don't need to do a head check and roll call. Following a fire drill, you need to do a debrief with staff, and it's a good idea to do it with participants as well. So look at things, what went well. Actually, did we leave the building quickly? But what could be improved? And we also need to record fire drills for monitoring and audit. So on the internet, there's a fire evacuation drill form, and we need to complete that for all fire evacuations done, even if it was a false alarm. The next thing we're looking at is activity management plans, and you might hear them referred to as an AMPS, and this is a way of managing risks that we have on site. So activity management plans allow us to assess the locations we're working from and activities we're doing. And it's something we should do about every 6 months. If you're doing a term-based activity, you might do it once per term. For example, if you're an out-of-school program, you might do it every term and then every holidays. If you're an education program, you might do it every holidays. You do it before a new activity. Review activity management plans to make sure they reflect your new activity. If something on your site changes significantly, if you found a new hazard or risk, then you would update the activity management plan. The activity management plans list all hazards or potential hazards, either on your site or in the activity. So any actual or potential causes of harm or risk that may occur inside or outside of a place of work. It also ranks those hazards. So it considers how frequent and the severity of the outcome from those hazards. And they also decide on a strategy whether you're going to eliminate, so completely get rid of a hazard, or minimize the risk of a hazard. So any significant hazard must be dealt with before a site can be used or an activity takes place. So the manager or whoever's planning an activity will do an activity management plan. It will then be reviewed by one up from them, so their manager or the quality compliance and safeguarding advisor. And once it's approved and signed off, that means that activity can take place. And it's really important that we're recording on the AMP form that all parties sign acknowledge and acceptance of it. So whoever's planning the activity has written the AMP, their one-up has reviewed and signed it off, and then all the staff who are involved in that activity need to read through and sign it. So generally there'll be a debrief prior, and you'll be given the opportunity to read through the activity management plan. It's really important that you read thoroughly and you understand that activity management plan. It's important that we're always reviewing and having continuous improvement in our activity management plans. So this is an example of an activity management plan. This is an out-of-school one, but it looks the same. So on here at the top, you'll have all the information about what the activity is, so that anyone can come along and pick it up and see what the activity is, what permissions you need to have, what competencies of the participants, what the communication number is, what your ratios are, all that sort of thing. If there's toilets on site, water, do you need a standard operating procedure? If so, what is that standard operating procedure? Then, as you can see in the red circle, you list the site-specific hazards or risks. So we use the words hazard and risk interchangeably, but they are slightly different. So a risk is an undesired outcome. That might be something like a broken bone, something we don't want to happen. And the hazard is what causes it. So if the risk is a broken bone, it might be that there's an uneven piece of ground that is the hazard that will cause that risk. So here you are recording the hazards or risks that are specific to the site you're on. Below that are the hazards or risks that are specific to the activity you're doing. So you may have an activity, for example, you're doing soccer, and there's a hazard that's specific to that activity. And regardless of where you move that activity, what site you work from, that hazard still exists. But when you move from site, the hazards for the sites may change. Then over here is what is your management of the hazard or risk? What are you going to do to minimize that hazard or to reduce it? And we also will list the severity and potential. So severity is rated from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest severity and 10 being the highest. And it's based on the same severity scale we use for incident reports, so we'll go through that later. And there's also the potential. So low, there's a low potential of it happening, medium potential, high, there's a high potential. So it's quite possible you might have something that has a really high severity if it happened, but there's a low potential of it actually happening. Or you might have something where it's quite a low severity if it does happen, but there's a high potential of it happening. And then on the right is the result. After we've put those management strategies in place, what's the result? Have we completely eliminated the hazard? Is it no more? Or have we minimized the hazard? And majority of the time, the result will be that it's minimized. There's a second page to the activity management plan, and that shows a place to put pictures. So we all learn differently. Some people find it easier to read. Some people find it easier to look at pictures. So those pictures add context to the words to help different people. There's also a place for an emergency response plan. So if an emergency did happen, what was our response plan? And for signing. So the person who wrote the activity management plan signs it off. The one-up who reviews it signs it off. And then the staff who are working on that activity will sign it off. And again, don't sign something if you don't understand it or you don't agree with it, because the minute you sign it, you are agreeing to follow those management strategies. Now, I use this target diagram to help work out the difference between risks, hazards, and actions, and to help me work out risks that might be on site to put into an activity management plan. So if we look at the red in the middle, that's the risks. Those are those undesired bad things to avoid if we're running an activity. Things like your broken bones, concussion, etc. The hazards are the things that lead to those undesired bad things. So that's in the yellow part. And the actions to manage are what can we do to eliminate or minimize those hazards. And then around the outside is the emergency responses. What actions would we take if bad things did occur? So now we're going to do an activity. So you can pause the video here and do this activity. On the right, I've got a few pictures of different activities happening. So I want you to have a look at them and fill in the risk diagram. Have a look. What are some of the risks you can see? Fill it in the red bit. What are some of the hazards? What actions would you take to manage them, and what would your emergency response be? So just jot it down on a piece of paper. All right, now you've done that activity, we're going to transfer the information from that target diagram into this activity management plan. So again, at the top is all your information on what your activity is. So if we take one of those construction activities, you'd put your activity description as carpentry outside using nails and hammers and whatever resources you've got. Then your site-specific hazards or risks are what you identified in the red and yellow sections of that target diagram. So what were your risks and hazards you saw in those pictures? Severity, potential. What was the severity and what's the potential? And then in the management, how are we going to manage that hazard or risk? And result, what have we done? Have we eliminated it or have we minimized it? So for example, if we're looking at one of those construction ones, the site-specific might be, well, you're outside, it was beside a river, so the river is a hazard of that site. But activity, well, they were using hammer and nail, so getting a cut is a risk of that activity. So we need to have AMP forms for any high-risk activity or if there's a group of similar activities. So for example, if you were going to do a whole pile of different cooking activities, you might have one activity management plan that covers all your cooking or outdoor play or construction or whatever it is you're going to do in your program. We need to review and reprint and re-sign anew at least every 6 months, or if you're term-based, every term is a good idea to do it. There needs to be a briefing prior to engaging in any new activity. So if you've got a new activity happening, you're going to do a new activity management plan, you're going to brief staff and sign it. If something changes on site, you have a new hazard that's identified, then you would review your AMP2 and you would get staff to review that. And when new staff start, like you guys now, then you would be given the chance to review and sign the activity management plan. And it's important that we're always keeping our activity management plans fresh. So it's not lip service. We actually are reviewing, that we're reading, and that we're understanding activity management plans. Because it's our plan on how we are going to manage those hazards and risks in site to make sure that everybody's safe and that they get home at the end of the day. Now, I've talked a little bit about the intranet, and here is a picture of the intranet. So again, this is where we have all our policies and procedures, checklist documents, and all the important things for the organisation. And the page I'm showing you is the health and safety page. So on here is the link to incident reports. So you can see there's YKids incident reporting. So that's for YKids. And there's also all other business units. So that's for incident reporting for all other business units. There's also gear checks. So if you're doing checks on gear, you'd fill that out. It might be a first aid kit. It might be gear using in outdoor education or gear in your program that needs to be checked regularly. There's the evacuation form. So when you've had an evacuation, you've done a fire drill, that's where you fill that form. The daily hazard check, you don't need to worry about. That's for out-of-school programs. The risk found form. When you're on site and you find a new risk or hazard, then you complete this form. You tell your manager so they're aware of it, and they'll either get you to fill in the risk found form or they'll fill it in for you. And when that risk found form gets filled in, it then gets sent off to myself as the compliance advisor and to the manager. That then keeps a record of new risks on site and enables us to put it in the risk register, which is the next button you'll see. Now, each business unit has their own risk register, and the risk register's outlined all the risks in that business unit and how the severity and potential and how they're going to be minimised. So much like the activity management plan, but this is just a wider view of it. So the activity management plan is specific to a number of different activities. The risk register is for the whole business unit, and they get updated about every quarter. We look at one at each of the health and safety committees. So when a risk found form is completed, it then informs that risk register. Then excursion checklist is there. That's an out of school care form again, but if you are running a program where you're doing excursions, you can use that as well. It's just a prompt to make sure that you're doing all the forms you need to do when you're going on an excursion. What is really important to note is the incident and accident forms. So these are used for recording incidents, accidents, and near misses. So incidents, it could be a behavioural incident, something that's happened. Accident, when there's an injury. And a near miss is when something could have happened, but it's just missed. As an example, if you were doing outdoor cooking and someone kicked over the outdoor cooker and boiling water fell onto the ground, it hasn't hit anywhere, there's been no burns, but there was the potential severity to happen. We use incident and accident forms to enable follow-up and improvement. We also use them for communicating with parents. So for those sites with participants under 18 years of age, then they will use those incident reports to communicate with parents. It also enables officers of the YMCA to monitor incidents, accidents, and assess how we are managing and learning. So again, the Health and Safety Committee every quarter will review the incidents and accidents that are happening. We'll look for trends. It may be that we see a number of things happening, so we know that we need to do more training or we need to change a policy and so on. Now, on the intranet, when you click on that incident report form, it brings this form up, and this is what you fill in. And you can do it on a laptop, you can do it on a tablet, and you can do it on your phone. So you just fill in all the information. And it's important to note that when you are filling in an incident or accident, it needs to be done, if possible, by the end of your shift, but within 24 hours at the absolute most. So when you're filling it in, you fill in what your sender, there's a drop-down box, what it applies to, the staff member who's completing the form, what your activity was, who was in charge of the activity at that time, so who was responsible. Then it will ask the severity, and like on the activity management plan, it's from 1 to 10, and there is a link there to the severity scale, so you can always bring up the severity scale and have a look and see where you think the severity is. Then there's also the day and time of the event, and then you put in who was involved in the incident, so give names and contact details, if any secondary assistance was required, and a brief summary of the incident, and then any outcomes. There's a place for other messages and notes. And you can also add files if you need to, and then you would submit it. And when you submit, it goes to the manager and also to the quality compliance and safeguarding advisor. Now, any incidents that are level 4 or over need to go to your managers, to your site manager. Any incidents that are level 6 and over need to go to the CEO and the board. So if it's a level 6 and over incident, you tell your manager, who will then tell either their manager, who tells the CEO, or direct to the CEO, and the CEO then informs the board. So when a level 6 or above incident form is completed, it is automatically sent a copy to the CEO and to all the members of the senior leadership team. They then inform the board and the chair of the board. So anything where third-party assistance is required is a level 6. So for example, if there was a fire alarm set off and fire trucks came, that's a level 6. If you had to call an ambulance, that's a level 6. And it's really important that you're making sure that you tell your manager straight away. And I've just circled there where you can add files and then you submit the button. Now, this is a copy of the severity scale. So it ranks from 1, which is the lowest, through to 10. And there's different areas, so impact on participation, injury, illness, social or psychological damage, environmental damage, or incident. And you can read through and work out where you think the incident sits. So, for example, if we're looking at environmental damage, at level 1, that would be littering. But at level 5, it's something like walk through sensitive ecological area, destroying some plant life, or toileting close to watercourse. Then we get up and we go 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is the highest. That's where you'd have things like multiple fatalities, major fire pollution, etc. So that is attached to the incident report, so you can always go in and have a look. And we also use this severity report to work out the severity when we're doing our activity management plans. Then specific policies and procedures to manage common risks at the Y. So first aid, illness, allergies and medication, hygiene, so your food, cleaning, hand washing, and sun safety, smoke-free and vape-free. First of all, first aid. So we have a minimum of 1 first aider on site at all times. So ideally we have more, but at a minimum we have 1 first aider on site at all times. So it's really important that you know who the first aiders are. So if you have an incident and you're not a first aider yourself, you know who to go to. So when you do your site induction, ask who the first aider is. Also in the activity management plans, it'll list who the first aiders are for that activity, so you know who to use. You also need to know where the first aid kit, make sure you know where it is, because you might not need a first aider to do it. You might have to use some of the first aid kit supplies for yourself, so always know where it is if you're putting a plaster on or so on. The first aid kit also needs to be regularly stocked. So that will be the responsibility usually of the site manager, but they may delegate it to someone else. So it's important that we always have regularly stocked first aid kits on site. It's also important that in the case where you're dealing with blood, that you protect yourself from contact. So you use disposable gloves, and those will be available in that first aid kit. Illness, allergies, and medication. So allergies. So sometimes if we're running programs, we'll have participants who have allergies. So if we're running programs, we need to make sure that we're making food choices where they have alternatives, where they're not going to see allergies. If we have people coming to our site with allergies, that we're making sure that they're not going to be exposed to those allergens. If we're doing a cooking activity, that we're providing other options for them. Sometimes people are anaphylaxis, and if we have participants on our program who are anaphylaxis, we need to know that. We need to have a plan. We need to know where the EpiPen is, how to use it, and we may need to make sure that we're rehearsing those plans as well. Where we have participants under the age of 18 and they need medication, as staff will be responsible for that. Where there is another organisation, for example, Out to Education, if it's a camp coming if it's a school coming to camp, then the teachers of the school will be responsible for the medication. But if it's a holiday camp where they're coming with the YMCA staff are responsible for the medication. So your out of school programs, ECE education, all sorts responsible for medication. So it's clear that we only give medication with written permission. So if someone comes in and hands you medication, if we haven't received written permission, we can't give out that medication. So they need to complete a medication administration form, which outlines what's the medication, when's it to be given, what's the instruction, dosage, etc. And child or the participant needs to be cited taking the medication by 2 staff members. So we can't just give a medication and let them go off. They need to be cited by 2 staff members. Of course, there's some things like, for example, an asthma inhaler. So an asthma inhaler might stay on site with the child, with them, and they administer it when they feel that they need it. And it's important that we record when we give medication, and it's signed by both staff members. And also medication needs to be kept secure, so it's locked, so people can't get access to it. So children can't get access to medication that's not for them, but also there are some medications that have a street value and people do steal them, so we need to make sure that they're kept secure. So this is a consent to administer medication. So when you have a participant who's under the age of 18, their parent or guardian will complete this form. So it gives the name, what the name of the medication, the dosage, administering requirements. Also dates to be administered from or to. So it might be that they've got a short course of antibiotics and they only need to be given it for 10 days. So the dates are put in there so we know when we should be giving it. Also, it's really good practice to redo these forms term by term if it's an ongoing medication, because there's always changes in dosages and so on. When we're administering, we need to fill out this form. So we put in the date, the time it was administered, the name of the medicine, dosage, the person who administers then signs, the second person who was witnessing signs it, and when the parent or guardian or approved person collects, then they sign it as well. And it's really important that they're always signing so they know what medication was administered. We also have food policies. Some of our programs serve food. So food hygiene is really critical, and we need to make sure that we meet legal requirements. We also encourage healthy eating, and we provide food that is consistent with it. So some of our sites, such as camps and early childhood, where they're preparing meals, have a food control plan. Other sites have no food control plan, so at those sites, only shelf-stable foods are to be served. You can do cooking as part of an activity, that's perfectly fine, where there's clear learning outcomes and the children and young people participants are participating in that activity. But shelf-stable foods, things like fruits, veggies, popcorns, crackers, can only be served when there's no food control plan. Obviously, if you have people on site with allergies, we need to ensure alternative foods are available, and we also need to respect the food requirements of different religions. It's really important in terms of food hygiene that we're cleaning, cooking, chilling. So we're following the 3 C's, and that keeps us and others safe from bugs in food and reduces the chances of food poisoning. So let's look at cleaning. So washing surfaces, chopping boards and utensils with soap and hot water, and rinsing in clean water. Before you're using them to handle and prepare food, between preparation of raw and cooked foods, that we're carefully washing and drying all food storage containers before use. So we're not just getting new containers and throwing food in, that we're cleaning them before we use them. That we're using different sponges and cloths for dishes and the bench and the floor, so we're keeping them separate. You're not going to use something on a bench that you'll then use on the floor. And for those really messy spills, using paper towels is a great way of getting that mess out, and then using a cloth and hot water and detergent afterwards. We're changing reusable dishcloths or sponges regularly, and we clean by rinsing, and then we can soak overnight in a shallow dish of water, 5 to 10 drops of household bleach, or microwave for 3 or 4 minutes on high, or put through the hot wash cycle in the dishwasher. When we're doing dishes, we use a dishwasher, or if a dishwasher isn't available, hot soap or water to wash dishes. And we need to be ensuring tea towels are washed regularly and swapped out when wet. So we don't want to be washing dishes with wet towels. We want to make sure that dishes are nice and dry before they're put away. We always want to cover, store food, might use Glad wrap foil, airtight containers, even when we're in the fridge and the cupboard, and that we're keeping raw meat and chicken away from ready-to-eat food, fruit and vegetables, and we store things like raw meat and chicken at the bottom of the fridge because that prevents any juices from running down because you don't want to contaminate other foods with harmful bacteria. The last thing we need to think about is sun safety. So children and staff are expected to wear sun hats when outside during terms 1 and 4. So if you're running a program where children and young people are working, they need to be wearing sun hats. If you are working a program where you're outside, you need to be wearing sun hats during term 1 and 4. And, for children's programs, no hat, no outside play. It's always a good idea to have spare hats for children or staff who forget to bring their own, because that's your personal protective gear. That's protecting yourself from the sun. Children are also expected to wear sunscreen when outside during terms 1 and 2. And the YMCA provides sunscreen, unless a parent states otherwise because the child has an allergy, and that sunscreen is also there for staff to put on so they're protected, so that if they have to go outside, they're protected from the sun. We also have smoke-free and vape-free policies at the YMCA. So all sites are smoke and vape-free inside. All out-of-school ECE sites are smoke-free and vape-free anywhere on the site. And some sites, such as Pilmuir Accommodation or Education, have specific smoking areas. So smoking and vaping are in those areas and they're not to be undertaken outside of those areas. Staff, parents and guardians, participants are not to smoke around children while they're at the YMCA or if they're out on excursions. And it's also important to note that staff are not to smoke or vape while in YMCA uniform. So if we follow all these health and safety rules, if we're working safe, it'll ensure that we get home safe for the children and participants, parents and caregivers, our visitors and us. If you have any questions, first instance, talk to your manager or health and safety reps. So we have health and safety reps for each of the areas. So there's ones for Hutt Valley, Sport and Recreation, Oharu area, City area, for youth, for early childhood education and Wanganui, that's a combined role, for accommodation, for the Palmerston North area, and for outdoor education. So all the health and safety reps are listed on the internet with their contact details. So if you have questions, if you want to pass on things, you can talk to them and they'll pass it through to the Health and Safety Committee. You can also talk to the Quality, Compliance and Safeguarding Advisor, which is Amy Moreland, and the email there is amymoreland@ycentral.nz. So that's the end of the health and safety training. Thank you for completing it. Now you need to go on and complete the health and safety quiz. Thank you.